right, good morning, everyone. This is Mike Dane with MLS Technology. Today we're going to be discussing RPR, which is a tool that you guys have access to through the National Association of Realtors. I did want to run through just some basic things real quick before we get started with the actual course content itself. So everyone's going to be starting on mute by default. I did want to mention that there is a Q&A button down there at the very bottom of the screen. This is where you guys can ask any questions in text form. If you do end up needing to ask a question with your voice, we'll have an option for that. I'll discuss that in a moment. I also wanted to mention we have a chat section down there. This is where you guys can post any comments, examples, any anecdotes that you guys want to share. But please try to make sure that if you are going to ask a question that you don't put that into the chat section. Please make sure that you put that into the Q&A option. The Q&A option does give me a little bit more of a notification than the chat does. So I just will be able to better see that there's actually been a question asked. So I appreciate you guys working with me on that. I also wanted to mention that the session will be recorded. We'll be sending a link to the recording after class is over. But in the interim, if you guys do end up having any problems with the audio or video or any issues at all with the session, please let me know immediately. Since this is a CE credit class, we want to make sure that everybody's actually getting the CE credit. And if it turns out that you're having audio issues or video issues during the course, that could mean that there's other people that are also having problems. So that way we can ensure that everybody's getting the credit that they deserve and that everybody's going to be able to participate in the class. Finally, in regards to that CE credit, I wanted to point out that we will be getting the CE credit out to you guys pretty quickly. Getting the information over to OREC is usually not too much of a problem, but I did want to point out that it may not appear immediately. So we'll get the attendance sent off to them, but it may take a little bit of time for that to appear on your license. All right. Additionally, I also wanted to point out those buttons down at the very bottom of your screen. Again, chat for any commentary, stories you'd like to share, whatever. Q&A for any questions that you have. And if you do have a question that you'd like to ask with your voice, there is a raise hand option. I'm going to be using this from time to time just to ensure that you guys are actually still present. So of course, if you do end up having any issues, you can always hit that raise hand button instead of typing in the Q&A. It is a 2-hour-long class, so feel free to use that at your as it comes up. Speaking of which, if you guys are on a mobile device, you may need to tap the screen in order for those buttons to appear. All the more reason for us to offer that raise hand option. Typing on a little tiny keyboard on your screen might be a little bit difficult to get your question out quickly, but if you guys do end up having a question, you guys can do either or. Also, just, I know this isn't necessarily too important, but I do see somebody's called in as a call-in listener to the webinar. If you're doing that just because the audio on your computer isn't functioning properly, no worries. Fortunately, I won't be able to give you CE credit unless you do have the screen up. But again, I've heard a million different ways to do the webinars. If you guys are just calling in to get the audio, that's no problem at all. You'll still be eligible for credit as long as you've got your screen up. All right. So I'm going to be launching a poll. So this poll is going to just be effectively our gateway into the class. This is going to be used to verify that you guys are present. During the course, I'm also going to be asking you guys to raise your hand on occasion. During those occasions, I'm going to have to see that everybody's hand is raised. If I do not see that your hand is raised, you will not be able to get CE credit for the class. So please make sure that you're present, listening. Just for clarity, that is to avoid having to have everybody share their camera with me. I would prefer to avoid that just because it requires a lot more attention to be spread between those two things. And we've got special permission from OREC to be able to do that. So just to allow you guys to have this a little bit more accessible and not have to do yourself up at 9 a.m. for getting witnessed by other people. I see that we've got 2 people that still haven't participated in the poll or I guess technically one, since the call-in listener can't participate. But after we're done with this poll, we're going to go ahead and start the course content. Anybody that arrives after that will no longer be eligible for CE credit. Excellent. All right. So got everybody's participation, it looks like. So we're going to go ahead and close that poll. Thank you guys for that. So just from the looks of it, it looks like we actually have a slight majority of the class is new to real estate. Welcome. Honestly, this is going to be a great starting place for you guys. The RPR app is honestly one of the best things that you guys have access to as a realtor. I'm always a little surprised when people haven't heard of it. And it does appear that, again, slight majority of you guys have not used RPR before. I'm assuming there's a little bit of overlap there. So by the end of the day, I'm hoping you guys will all get some interest in this app. We'll start using it. So we're going to go ahead and start with the course content. And looks like 9:06 was when we finished the poll. So that'll be our official starting point for the class. All right. So let's get that pulled up. And we're all set. Just so you guys are aware, we will be taking a break at the top of the hour. But we're going to go ahead and get started. Now, RPR is referred to as the Realtor Property Resource. This is actually a tool that has been presented to you guys through the National Association of Realtors. About 12 years ago, right? Yeah, 12 years ago, RPR was founded. This was actually a wholly owned subsidiary corporation that NAR purchased, and it's a national database of parcel-centric property information. It has over 160 million US properties information built into this system. It's also going to be aggregating a lot of information from other sources as well. We have over 350 different sources of information that are being put in on each of the pieces of property that you guys will have access to through this system. And effectively what this is trying to be is a lightning rod for any questions that your client might have. So what that means is that whenever you guys have a client that's asking questions that maybe they could go Google or look up on Zillow or whatever the case may be, instead of trying to go find a third-party source that may not always necessarily have up-to-date information or reliable information, they're going to be coming to you with those questions instead. So during our course today, we're going to be discussing how to find those properties from the perspective of both a buyer and a seller. We're also going to be discussing how to create the reports. The reports are one of the fundamental tools of RPR. They present a really easy option for you guys to be able to get a bunch of information put into a nice cohesive format in just a matter of minutes, if less. We also wanted to mention there are constantly updates to this system. In fact, actually sometime a little bit later this month, they're going to be adding a new feature for a system called Climate Check, where you guys can just click on a button and find out what the effects of climate change are going to be over the next 30 years. Again, trying to match what a 30-year mortgage would be like, so people have a better understanding of what things could be like. That's going to be introduced sometime later this month, if it hasn't been already. I haven't received the announcement yet, but we'll discuss that a little bit later. And this is also something that's not going to be a charge to you as realtors. This is already included in your member benefits from NAR. In doing so, this is actually going to be something that you have access to, even if you guys leave our MLS or a part of multiple MLSs or even leave the state. This is always going to follow you as long as you guys are a realtor. I did also want to point out, since all of this focus has so far been on what you guys can do as realtors, again, the lightning rod as realtors, and so on and so forth, this does not have a client front end. There is no public access, much like how Matrix has a back end that you guys have the ability to do searches in and set up all sorts of different features and functions, market watches, hot sheets, all sorts of things like that. But then they also have a client portal, the One Home system that you guys are probably familiar with. RPR does not have a consumer front end like One Home. All the interactions that a client will have with RPR are going to be funneled through you. and any of the reports that you create and output to your client. So we're going to be discussing all of that a little bit later. Also, this is something that was a little bit of a concern whenever RPR was initially introduced 12 years ago. RPR is not an MLS. So all the information that we're going to be seeing in here as we're going through is all going to be data that's been provided through an MLS, or it's going to be information that was provided through tax record details or public records from assessors' offices, ESRI, the US Census, Bureau of Labor Statistics, so on and so forth. But any of the properties that are currently for sale had to have been funneled through an MLS. None of the information was directly input into RPR, which was a major concern for some reason when it was initially introduced. A lot of people were thinking that NAR was trying to introduce a national MLS system. That's not the case. Again, the focus was trying to make sure that each area has their own MLS, which is going to oblige their own rules and regulations, make sure that everything is done properly. It's much easier to do that on a small scale, which an MLS can provide, rather than trying to do it on a national scale. So everything is being funneled through those MLSs in regards to any of the active listings and properties. Also, they do not, again, have a customer front end or consumer facing business model. You are going to be the only person that has access to this as far as your clients are concerned. Also, this is an endpoint for any of the MLS data. So just like we don't have information put directly into RPR, no information is leaving RPR outside of those reports that you're creating. So you don't have to worry about this being a listing resyndicator or redistributor. So all of the stuff lands here, and it's not going to be going out to any third-party websites like Trulia or whatever. Now, as far as what we're going to be doing today, we are going to be using RPR to research property details. So for instance, if we have a buyer that's interested in any of the properties, we're going to be discussing how to find more information about that, get reports created for them. We're also going to be using RPR to help a seller, in this case, coming up with the best price for their property using the comp analysis as well as the refined analysis tools. There's also some additional options that we're not going to be discussing in class today, but there's going to be a lot of tools that allow you guys to learn more or kind of glean from webinars or tutorial videos, guides that they have to farm new areas. You guys can also use this to search for foreclosure information. And then we are going to be covering some of the report information, so how to create those customized branded reports, so that you guys can stand out at your next listing appointment, open houses, or even just getting buyers tours put together with any of those reports. Or even when you guys are out on the road, there is an RPR app equivalent that's going to allow you guys to create reports even when you guys are out on the road. All right, so before we get into searching for properties or anything else, I did want to run through just the basics of our homepage I've been scrolling through. I'm going to put us into a full screen. Oh, actually, I forgot one crucial step. If you guys are signing into RPR for the very first time, there will be a brief registration process. The registration process is going to be fairly simple. It's all going to be focused around the idea of using your NAR credentials. So you'll have to have your National Realtor Database System ID or NERDS ID, you may have heard it referred to. If you do not have that information, you guys can always get in contact with us at the service desk and we can provide that to you. But you can just simply click on that RPR link that we have on the MLS portal to get into the homepage. And then the registration process, after you're done, will just guide you into this homepage that we see here. Once you're on the homepage, there's going to be this section up here at the top to start doing our searches. We're going to spend a lot of time on that, so we'll just skip next to our shortcuts. The shortcuts are going to include a couple of the new features that they've added over the last couple of years. Again, since this is a constantly evolving app, there's going to be some new features that you guys will see added. Typically, they'll be emailing you this information to make sure that you're aware of it, but there's also going to be these options up here at the top to kind of guide you through some of the things that you'll be doing frequently, or that you guys might not even know that the system had been doing to begin with. We have a My Markets section. If you guys are familiar with the Market Watch and Hot Sheets section on Matrix, this is effectively the exact same thing. except instead of it being something that you have to click into in order to be able to see any of the data, it has a list of all of the places that you have for your market watch over here on the left-hand side. Whenever you click on one of these, it's going to break it down into the different statuses. So for sale, for lease, price change, pending, closed, closed for lease, distressed. And you can see all of those appearing on the map here. You can just click on one of the properties, see more information about it, or whatever the case may be. We're going to be discussing how to get these all set up so that you can have your own areas put in. So not to worry, we'll be discussing how to get that in there, actually not too long. A little further down on our homepage, we see any of your current listings. You can also switch over to any of your previous listings. Since I'm just a trainer and this is a fake account, we don't have any real listings connected to me, so obviously I'm not going to see anything here. But it's a nice, concise way to make sure that you guys are getting into your details of your listings in case you do want to send a report off to a potential buyer. We also have a section here for my properties. This is going to be properties that we've found rather than my own properties that I'm listing. This is properties that are for sale or potentially that you had found that you wanted to keep track of, whatever the case may be. You can save any listings or properties to a little saved area. When you click on this, you can see all of those. You can give them specific names as well. So for instance, in this case, I was working with a buyer. I named this their dream home. So I can jump back into this, run a report on it, or give them more information, or let them know if there's a price drop or whatever. We also have a recent section. So similar to how the saved is actually going to be things that we've chosen to save. Let's say that I was going through and searching for something on my computer or potentially even on my phone. You guys can see that little icon indicating whether or not it was something I searched for on my phone or on my computer. This will show me every property that I've clicked into. This is a quick and easy way to make sure that I'm actually jumping right back into a property I'd already viewed. In case when I was out on the road with a buyer, they had mentioned some property that was, look at that property across the street, it's got a for sale sign. You as the realtor might have no idea what this property is about or who's listing it or whatever the case may be. You click on the information on the RPR app, or if you guys are getting a phone call from a buyer and they mentioned some property and then you forgot what it was or didn't write it down, you can just jump right back into your recent properties that you viewed and jump into the reports for it. Also, we have the reports themselves. We can jump back into any of the reports that we've created by just clicking on View. This shows us any of the reports that we've run, including a little synopsis of where this was run for and what kind of report that it was. As we're going through, we're going to be creating a lot of different reports, so we'll take a look at that as time goes on. And Sherry, I'll get to your question in just a moment here. And then finally, we have our notes. The notes section is going to be information that we've added to any properties. In this case, you guys can see that I've added a couple notes to properties or even multiple notes to one property. We'll be discussing how to add those and also the different options that we have, because when you guys are creating notes for properties, you can just do basic text notes. You can also save photos. And when you guys are out on the road with your RPR app, you can even do voice recordings. So instead of having to, type everything out on your little tiny keypad, you can actually just do a voice recording and transcribe your information later, or even record discussions with a seller if you guys are working with a seller, so on and so forth. Then finally, we have our searches. We've got it either set up with a saved search, where if we set up a search that we're going to go back to frequently, we can just click on it, go right back in, or we can do a recent search and it shows us all the information about what we were looking for, what device we were looking for it on, so on. Right. Towards the bottom of the screen, we've got a RPR Facebook group. We've got a 24/7 phone number. Notice it doesn't even show the hours, it mentions it elsewhere that it is 24/7. And then we also have the RPR learning section. Now, actually, both of these pieces of information are also going to be found up here at the top. We've got a learning section here. We'll be discussing this a little bit later. We also have a help section here. I did want to mention this at the beginning of class. We'll mention it again at the end. But you guys have access to a knowledge base search right up here at the top, a phone number that's 24/7, a live chat, a training area, and even a 24/7 email address in case you guys ever need to reach out. Maybe you guys don't want to do a phone call or the live chat is not functioning at the time or whatever the case may be, you guys can always get help. And Sherry asks, what's the benefit of using RPR's hot sheet versus the MLS hot sheet? In my opinion, there really isn't any significant benefit to this over the matrix hot sheets other than just simply aesthetics. I think that the RPR hot sheets are a little bit prettier than what you guys can see on the matrix side of things. If I wanted to see a map of all of these properties, I'd have to click back on map. It's just giving me a bunch of data. Where their locations are is kind of going to have to be whittled down. Also, the hot sheets have to be manually set up, where if you guys wanted to specify a certain area or whatever the case may be, you would have to customize, create a new one, so on and so forth. And in fact, actually, in just a moment here, we're going to be discussing how to add different properties or different locations, different locations to our My Markets section. The big thing with this is just that we do have the option to see everything where it's located and then quickly click on one of them, find out if that's something that we like or not. But beyond that, they effectively serve the exact same purpose and they just parse out the data in different ways. But that's a good question. Both of them have their values. All right, so that's it for our homepage. We'll be looking back on this a little bit here and there, but before we actually get started with finding properties and getting things sent off to our clients, et cetera, I wanted to bring us up to our little profile up here at the top right corner. So we've got our home, research, marketing, so on and so forth, but on the far right, we're going to have our profile information. Now, if you guys have been through our matrix class or transaction desk or any of the others, you know that one of the first things we want to try and do is make sure that our profile is ready to go. So when you click on this icon here, there's a little arrow here, or you can click directly on the icon itself. There's going to be a couple options. First and foremost, we need to get into our profile and make sure that we have all the correct information. Make sure that you have an up-to-date photo of yourself. Just as a strong recommendation as far as branding goes, always make sure that you use the exact same headshot everywhere your information is going to appear. Part of the reason why we recommend this, or why I recommend this, I guess I should say, is because if you end up having the same name, same photo, same company name in the exact same format everywhere, it's far more likely that people are going to remember you. In fact, they did a little bit of a study on this a while ago, and it seems that whenever you have the same information presented to you 7 times, you're going to remember it almost indefinitely. So if people are seeing your face in the same format, same spelling, same photo on your Facebook, on your professional website, on your reports that you're creating with RPR, all that means is just that they're going to be far more likely to remember you, what you do, and who you represent. So make sure that that's always cohesive. Everything is going to be the same. And then as soon as it gets updated, make sure that you change that photo. That latter recommendation comes courtesy of some people that have some photos from the late 90s still on some profiles. Meanwhile, they have up-to-date photos elsewhere. So make sure that that's all the same. A little bit further down, we have our contact information. This should be up to date according to the member details that you guys provide to us. We always try to feed that information back to whoever is going to need it, including OAR, OREC, NAR. But if you guys notice that there's something that's incorrect on this page, please make sure to let us know on the MLS. It should allow you guys to make changes though. There are some sections that could be locked out. For instance, if you guys have the office information available there, it might be locked. Some of that information is going to be coming directly from the membership details. So if it's incorrect here, it's likely incorrect in other places as well, like Matrix. Further down, we have our phone, fax, emails. You guys can put your pager information if you guys are still working in the 90s. Same thing goes with our fax information, but further down, we have our MLS or CIE info. So jokes aside, this is actually a relatively important section. The MLS information is going to be gathering details from some of the MLSs that you guys are a part of. There are some MLSs that are actually not sharing details with the National Association of Realtors, or RPR. For one reason or another, sometimes it's to try and make sure that the only place that they can get accurate market details is from the agents that are functioning in that area. It's not particularly cooperative, but that is how they have a lot of sections set up. Down here at the very bottom, you can see that I've got MLS technology already connected. If you guys are part of another MLS, or if you guys don't see our contact or our name here, you just have to choose your state, choose the MLS that you're a part of. Go. Or if you guys are part of the MLS in Oklahoma City, and then just put in your agent information and then click add. It'll validate the information in here, so make sure that you guys are putting in the correct information. But that should allow you guys just a little bit more branding options when you guys are sending information off. So you can choose between whether you want the branding for MLS technology, which is just going to be this dot here, or if we added in another MLS, you can switch over to that other MLS. Coincidentally, this does not change how much information you guys have access to. I think I've stated it in a way that might have implied that in previous lessons, but I want to make sure that you guys are understanding the MLSs that are sharing information for everyone, which means that anybody in the country can see MLS Technologies information or MLS OK's information. If you guys would like to see which MLSs in your area are sharing details, we can go down to this Listing Data Access button, and it's going to consolidate all of the MLSs in the area. Again, any MLS that's registered with the National Association. And we can see this by the filter up at the top here, MLSs that share data with me. In our case, we have Duncan, Lawton, MLS Technology, and the MLS in Oklahoma City. We're all sharing the information about the properties that are currently on the market. MLS Technology is additionally sharing some details about the properties that are off market. We cover a little bit more than half of the property, or half of the counties in the state, or no, actually 77, just one shy less of half. But we have a pretty good coverage. MLS in Oklahoma City also covers a pretty good amount. So between the two of us, we've got most of the state covered. There are some other MLSs that are not sharing some data though. So I'm going to switch my filter over, and this is going to be MLSs that don't share data with me. So we've got the North Central, Northeast, Northwest, and Stillwater. So, but collectively, not too many counties are going to be absent their information. But if you do end up needing to search for a property up in the northeast corner of the state, you're going to have to get in contact with those realtors in order to find out more details about them, even if you guys wanted to look it up in RPR. Now, regardless of whether or not the property is currently on the market, you'll still have access to the property details for any properties in those areas. So even if you guys are working with a buyer that's interested in a property in, I don't know, Afton, for instance, you guys don't have to worry about whether or not the property is currently on the market. You can still find all of the property details. It just won't show you guys what the current price is, or who the listing agent is, or anything else. So any of the stuff that's actually put into the MLS will be absent, but the rest of the details about that property will be there, just like any other off-market property. All right. You do also have the information here for your license number. Again, since I legally can't have a real estate license, I don't have one, but make sure that you guys have that put in there. This is just extra information that will appear on reports for you. Now, finally, at the very bottom here, we've got our assistant users section. Now, I've tried to reiterate this over and over again just to ensure that you guys are understanding that this is not a portal for consumers to have access to. The assistant user section, again, similarly, is not going to be something that you want to put a buyer or seller into in order to be able to have access to this system. There is a lot of confidential information that you guys will have access to for listing details that are put into the MLS. A lot of MLSs will have some pretty explicit violations and fines associated with sharing MLS data. So make sure that whenever you guys are putting in an assistant, you're putting in an unlicensed assistant that's registered with the MLS, not just somebody that works in your office, not just a buyer or seller that you guys want to have access to this system. Again, this is going to be showing what kind of contracts people have, the broker remarks, the compensation amounts. There's a lot of information in there that's not meant to be viewed by the public. which could include showing instructions that have gate codes that are not meant to be viewed by some buyer that might go in and steal property. So make sure that you guys are being very cognizant of this as an assistant user section. All right, back up to the top of the page. I did want to run through over here on the right-hand side. This is just basic account information. This is all going to be imported over from your details that you have with the National Association of Realtors. So what your last name is, your NERDS ID, your email address. You have the ability to change your password here. Make sure that you guys have the correct time zone. If you guys are working in multiple different time zones, you can switch between those. You also have access to the mobile app. See which devices that you guys have currently assigned to RPR. So as you can see, I've actually got a phone, an iPad, and of course my iPhone. All of those devices will have access to RPR. And if it turns out that, I got rid of this device, I can remove it. Or if I just needed to make sure that all of them are up to date, looks like everything is valid. I've got it all valid through June. All right, so that's it for our profile. If you do end up making any changes, make sure to hit that save button. It'll give you a little confirmation that everything is saved. You can hit close and you'll be good to go. Let's head on now to the settings. If you guys have already gone through and gotten all of your profile information up to date, so this was kind of superfluous, up here at the top right, you can quickly jump into the settings. If you're already on the profile page, you can click on settings from here as well. We'll see these tabs appearing in a lot of different places, so just keep that in mind. So the settings section is actually going to allow us to make some modifications to what's considered a new listing. And we can also set how many properties or how far back we want to see of recently sold or leased properties. If you remember when we were looking at the home page of NAR or RPR, excuse me, this My Markets section had the for sale, for lease, closed, et cetera, et cetera. And we got to see these little tags next to them that say new, or in this one, we've got coming soon. But these little tags are actually going to be modified with this setting. So if you're working in an area where a new listing really isn't new after 3 days, cool, we can mark that so that if we see something that's a week old, we're not going to be considering that something new. And when we look at it on the map, it's not going to show that little tag. If we are working in an area that's maybe not seeing quite as much market activity and something that's even 2 weeks old is considered new, we can slide this all the way over there to 14 days or even all the way out to a month if you guys are working somewhere really rural. Same thing goes with our recently sold or leased. So if I switch this over to closed, this is going to show me any of the properties that had recently closed, but this is going to be recent, quote unquote, according to this measurement as well. So just like we did with the set new listings, I can slide this all the way up to the last 6 months so I can see any of the properties that sold in the last 6 months rather than, the last 30 days. So again, set this according to where you guys are primarily working, just to ensure that you guys aren't seeing a map that's radically cluttered with a bunch of new tags, or of course, again, radically cluttered with a bunch of recently sold properties. So again, make sure that you guys are setting those according to the areas that you're working in. We have separate settings for the commercial side. And you guys may have noticed this on our homepage, but there is a pretty quick and easy toggle between residential properties and commercial properties. So if you guys are looking for a property that's commercial, that's another area of your expertise, you guys can use this for either or. Again, we've got 160 million properties in here, or over 160 million. So there's a lot of different things you can search for. Now, make sure that you save any of the settings that you've got there. Now let's talk about this My Markets section. Now you may remember that I tried to draw a parallel between the Hot Sheets and Market Watch section of Matrix. Similar to the way that we can customize and create hot sheets for Matrix, these My Markets sections, so I've got Owasso, Durant, et cetera, those are going to allow us to just quickly and easily see what's going on in those market areas. All of that's going to be defined under the settings in this My Markets section. So again, just to clarify where we are, since I'm jumping back and forth between pages, we finished our profile, we moved on to settings, I set my tags that are going to appear on the map, and over here on the right, I can add My Markets. Now, they try to prioritize this because this might change pretty dramatically if you guys are working in different markets, or even just over the last couple of years, the market has been pretty wild. So nowadays, you might be sliding this one a little further and further out, but the My Markets section isn't quite going to change as frequently. Just make sure that you guys put in any of the areas that you're working in. In my case, this list that we have is where we do the outreach training. And in fact, just as a kind of side note, in our business, we are actually trying to get a new trainer available. So we're going to be getting a new outreach trainer. That was my previous position. Now that I'm the training director, we need to have somebody that's still going to be going out to do training. So we're going to be sending people out to Owasso, Durant, Tahlequah, Bartlesville, Ada, so on and so forth. If you guys would like for us to have someone come out and do training in your area, we can send somebody out, make sure that we have a venue that's going to be available, so on and so forth. So if you don't see the area that you guys are on this list, or in on this list, or if one of these areas is not nearby, make sure to let us know. We can always find out what we can do to get you guys some outreach training, so in-person training. All that's going to be dependent on the COVID numbers decreasing, which is the only reason why we're not doing in-person training. Anyway, when you guys are needing to add a market area, just put in the area that you guys are going to be searching for. So for instance, let's say that I wanted to add in, let's do Stigler. So Stigler, it's going to offer us a couple different options on here. So if I wanted to just do Stigler, Oklahoma, click on that, and you'll notice it added down to the bottom of this list. Once I save this information and head back to my home page, I will now have a new area added onto this My Market section. So if I scroll down to the bottom, I can click on Stigler and see any of the properties that are currently for sale, for lease, so on and so forth. And again, if you guys do end up wanting to get rid of one of those, just click on your little icon at the top, back to settings, scroll down, find the item that you don't want to have anymore. So like Stigler in this case, I hit remove, and that'll be removed from my homepage. Just as a personal recommendation, I would try to limit how many of these you guys have open at the same time. If you guys do want to add in Ponto Talk, there we go, a county, how did we find this again? Yeah, there we go. Just type in the county's name and then just make sure that you guys are choosing the appropriate option. Okay. The counties I don't always necessarily recommend, just simply because of the fact that they pull in a lot more information. But if you guys are working in a county rather than just a specific area, you guys can see it that way, which is kind of nice. All right. So now let's move on. We're going to be discussing now how to actually work with a buyer. So first and foremost, we're going to land back here on our home page. We're going to start discussing these search options up here at the top. Now, the search options that you have on your home page are going to allow you to search by a location first and foremost, but all of the information that we're going to be searching for is going to be decided by these filters that we have over here to the side, and then further filters that you can expand right here. Now, let's start off with the basics. So we have this toggle over here to the left where we can switch between residential and commercial. I'm going to leave ours on residential today. Pretty much everything that we're going to be discussing is applicable to the commercial side. The only thing that's different is just the kind of options that are available. So instead of beds and baths, we've got building or lot. Property type options are going to be a little bit more catered or curated for the commercial side. If I switch this back over to residential, you can see the residential options instead. Sherry asked, how often is the information in RPR updated? Is it multiple times a day or only once in a 24-hour period? If I'm not mistaken, I think they actually have a live feed. So as soon as the information is entered into Matrix, within about 15 minutes, our data is actually being fed over to anybody that's gathering the details from our listing data. So Zillow, Trulia, they're all getting live feeds. RPR is going to be similar. And in fact, actually, that's a good question. Once we start seeing some of the properties, we're going to see how frequently some of the information that's actually found on those properties is updated. So for instance, demographic information is going to be collected by the US Census Bureau. That stuff's going to be updated once a year. that kind of stuff. That's a good question, especially in regards to the live details. So if you guys add a listing into the MLS, you guys should see that in RPR within about half an hour, typically less, much less. All right, so on our location information, once we have our filters set, we can just type in a bunch of different ways. If you guys wanted to do a search for a specific zip code, just type in the zip code. And notice it has found several matches. So we can find out if there's a specific road that we wanted to look for. In this case, it's even offering us specific properties that have that as their house number. But in my case, I'm looking for that zip code. Click on that, and it'll immediately start searching for the results. Now, if I go back to my homepage, we can also type in specific cities. So if I wanted to just search for anything that's happening in Eufaula, type in Eufaula, provides me a bunch of different options. Or if I wanted to even search for a specific county, so let's say Love County, Oklahoma. Now, as far as the filters go, we also have the type and status. Notice this is going to appear a little bit different than how we would see it in, say, Matrix or Realist. We can choose to include any of the properties that are currently for sale. You can also choose to include any of the properties that are for lease in case your client is interested in either or. But typically people are wanting to search for something that's for sale, so make sure to uncheck that. We also get to choose what statuses are available. So for instance, if I'm searching in this case for a buyer, I'm not going to be interested in anything that's currently pending. I just uncheck that checkbox. For property type, we can choose to include every single property type. You'll notice that this includes any of the vacant land or farm or ranch land. But in my case, I'm only searching for single family. Our price range options are actually split up into two different sections, one for flat price of a property that's for sale or a lease price. Since I chose not to include the lease options, I don't have the option to set a price for that. Nice and easy. In our case, we also have a for sale option for whether we want this to be the total value of the property, what the price per square foot is, what the lot price per square foot is, or the lot price per acre. Both of these are a lot better for vacant land. These are a lot better for properties that are going to be lived in. We also have just a section here to just type in text. This is one of my little pet peeves when I get to a website and they give me a drop down that doesn't allow me to manually type in my price range that I'm interested in. Because let's say we do have a client that's interested in a property that's maybe under 225,000. That's the max that they actually can get for their financing. I can type in 225, and notice this list provides me with a bunch of different options. So the drop down is trying to contextualize the number that I've put in here. I can just click on the option that I'm interested in. Now, if I were to run my search with the location put in now, it's going to be searching for anything that's 225 as a max. And since I have not put in a minimum, it's just going to find anything that's this or less. So similar to how we have in Matrix, if you guys are doing a search for properties and you type in that 225 minus, it's going to find any of the properties that are under that amount. But if we also wanted to put in a minimum, we can put in a minimum either from the dropdown. Again, notice it's presenting me with contextualized numbers. So if I only wanted to see things that are between 100 and 225, I can put that in there. Or if I wanted to manually type in my value, so 175, there we go. So I really like the way that they have that set up. It's a minor quality of life thing, but it just makes a lot more sense to me. We also have the bedrooms, bathroom counts doing the exact same thing where we have a minimum and maximum. So when we're on our bedroom count, if we want only things that are 3 bedrooms, I can type in 3 and notice it visualizes that as 3+. So anything that has 3 or more bedrooms. And then we can also do the same thing to bathrooms. Maybe I want to make sure that it has 3 or more bathrooms as well. Just to clarify, this bathroom count is not trying to check for full bath or half bath. This is just doing a flat bed or bathroom count. Now, if I were to just go ahead and put in an area, so in this case, let's do, actually, you know what, let's do Veneta. Let's see if there's anything up there. No properties were found. So remember, if we're typing in a search for any of the properties that we're searching for, or typing in the filters for any of the properties that we're searching for, if that location doesn't have anything, we'll come up with that. And this is part of the problem with doing a live search for you guys, but let's try this again. So we're doing sale, only want to see active or active under contract, do single family. Kind of just shot myself in the foot here because I chose to do a search from previous search. Let's do this again though, 3+, 3+, and we'll do, let's do you follow this time. There we go. All right. Oh, maybe let's try increasing the value. That's a pretty high dollar value area anyway. There we go. All right. Oh yeah, see, I was $70,000 off. All right. So now we've got a couple different properties that we can look at. Once we finally get to our search results, there's a couple different views that we can see it in. Now, obviously, in this case, it's going to start us off with our absolute basic view. So anytime you guys have run a search in Matrix, you guys are going to see a similar layout. It is going to be absent these photos that are over here on the side. If we click on these photos, it's actually going to load us into the properties details. We're going to spend a lot of time looking at the properties details a little bit later. So I'm going to head back to our search results. Notice there's a little breadcrumb trail of how we actually got to where we are. So if I just needed to go back one step, instead of hitting my back button on my browser, I can just hit search results. Now that I'm back on my search results, if I wanted to switch up this view, so for instance, I wanted to see the photos a little bit larger, maybe I've got a client that's actually kind of peeking over my shoulder, I can click photo view, and I can have them take a look at these individually like that. There's also a map view that we can choose. This map view is actually going to show us where each of the properties is located physically, giving us a little bit more context. And that little orange outline that you're seeing there is trying to indicate to you what the official parameters are of the Eufaula area that we were searching. Now, not to worry, this doesn't mean that if there's some property that's out here in outside of the official Eufaula city limits, that it's not going to show up. As long as it still says Eufaula as the city name, it's going to appear on our list. So not to worry, this isn't showing us the exact specifications of our search criteria or where it's going to be searching. This is just showing us the city limits of the area that we were searching. Anyway, we can also click on each of the properties from here. So just like we saw when we were looking at that My Market section on our homepage, you can select the items from here and then again, click on View Details to show the full property details. It'll remember that whenever we go back to our search results as well. So it'll return you to whatever view you guys happen to be looking at. So if I'm on the photo grid and I click on the property that I'm interested in, it'll bring me back to the photo grid whenever I move back one step. All right. Let's now talk about those additional filters. So I'm going to clear out our location and let's actually talk about these filter options. So when I click on filter, it's going to show us a live count. This is something that I actually really appreciate about the filters option, which is why I typically recommend it to people if you are doing a search. In addition to providing you with a little bit of an overview of all of the options that we had up above. So here we see our type status. We've got our property type. We've got our price, size, and then we also have the distress status. So for instance, if I don't want to see any properties that are currently in some kind of foreclosure status, I can exclude those. We can choose to include properties that have some kind of open house. Just to clarify, the open house information is coming directly over from the MLS. We also have the land or lot. So if we wanted to make sure that we were clarifying if we're looking for vacant land, what kind of designation it's been assigned, we can choose those. We also have the miscellaneous fields as far as whether or not this is owner occupied or not. We can even search for owner names. So again, if we're looking for off-market properties, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. We also can choose year built or how long it's been owned. And then finally, we have a keyword search. Now, the keyword search is, in my opinion, one of the most important things about adding the filters on here. If you guys are searching for something that's not already clarified anywhere else on the page, this is where we can put in any of those extra items. So for instance, I'm really partial to having mature trees on a property. So I can type in mature trees, hit enter, and that's going to provide that as a selected keyword. This means that anywhere that could appear either in the listing's public remarks, or if you guys have a property search in an MLS, like actually places that I was looking in Oregon or where I'm from in Colorado, they'll actually have that as a part of the MLS data, whether or not there's mature trees on the property. Whether it's something that was included as a public remark or whether it was included somewhere in the MLS details, it'll be able to search for that. So for instance, how many car garage, whether or not it's on a cul-de-sac, if it's a corner lot that's been mentioned, whether it has a waterfront to it, if it's a single story, split ranch. I mean, there's a whole variety of different options. But just remember, you guys can always type in things up at the top here as well. All right. So for instance, if I wanted to say asphalt, if I can spell asphalt, right? Is that right? I think so. It's not underlining it, so I think I nailed it. Anyway, so all of these filter options are going to be applied up here at the top. And then as soon as I type in my area, you can go right into our search results. So here we have our price. Oh, actually, we can finally decrease this price now. Run the search again. All right, down to 7 properties. Again, if we open this up and try to make any changes to this, so I'm at 7 properties now. If I switch this over to 200,000, I'm down to 4 properties, update and search, I'll see those 4 properties. Now, as we're going through and taking a look at each of these properties, you can see that I've got a little heart icon that I can click on for each of them from the photo grid view. That's also going to be present whenever we're looking at the list view right over here on the right. And then whenever we're looking at the map view, if we have a property that my client might be interested in, I can click on it. And just like on the photo view, it'll provide us that little heart icon. So I'm going to click on view full details for this property in particular. And we have another little save icon here. Again, while you guys are going through and working with that buyer, they may end up mentioning, oh, you know what, that actually looks like a really nice place. Click save. Now, when we're looking at these properties, this is going to be a very similar layout no matter what kind of property you're looking at, even if you're switching between properties that are on market, off market, residential, commercial. It's always going to have effectively the exact same format. A couple of the buttons up here at the top may end up disappearing depending on what kind of property you found. So for instance, this refined value option is going to be dependent on if it actually automatically assigned a price value to it through some kind of estimate. We'll be discussing that in a moment. The CMA option will always be present. The history, charts, neighborhood, all of those are going to be present up at the top. But pretty much other than some missing information here and there, so for instance, if it's a vacant lot, it's not exactly going to have a lot of details about the interior features, for instance. Everything should still stay in this nice layout. Now, starting us off at the top of the summary section, we've got any of the photos that have been added to the listing details. So what we can do here is we can actually see the photos. We can scroll through them like this. We can even put this into effectively a little slideshow option. There's a way to turn this on or off. So for instance, instead of allowing it to show any of the listing details or what the key box information is, so on and so forth, we can put this into a slideshow view. It kind of blurs out all of that information in the background. So we can show this to our clients in person while we're going through this. They've got a bunch of witches burrs sitting around there. A little further down, wait, actually, I did skip over something, excuse me. So we've got our photos. We can also see a street view. This is especially important if you guys are working with a property that maybe doesn't have any photos, or if the photos, for whatever reason, don't include what the front of the property looks like. You can see what it looks like from the street. For those of you who work in rural areas, this may not always be present, but there is always going to be that overhead view or a satellite view of the property, so you guys can see what it looks like. And it's going to try and focus you into the parcel itself. So you notice that this is kind of taking the center of the screen. That's the property that we're interested in. If there is a virtual tour of the property, it will send you out to that property's virtual tour. This is just something that happens to have been added to this listing. Then we can also see any of the historical photos. We can see those kind of categorized according to the previous listings for the property. Oh, and it looks like this one only had the one photo, which is perfectly normal. A lot of the listings from back in the day actually had all of the extra photos expunged except for the main photo. So in this case, that's what's happened. The previous listing only had the one photo that was imported for it. Anyway, so a little further down, we have our property summary. And again, this is similar to the way that Matrix has things laid out, where we've got the basic facts about the property, what the price is. But one of the things that's unique to RPR is there's going to be a couple different ways for it to produce a estimated value. In our case, we've actually found a property that has an RVM. Now, if you guys are familiar with an AVM, good for you. This is a relatively common term in the real estate industry. For those of you guys who have not, it's something that you guys are going to come across pretty frequently. An AVM is an automated valuation model. So what an automated valuation model is doing is it's trying to gather details from public records and produce a value for that property. Now, the AVM is something that you guys can see branded through a ton of different systems. The easiest way to try and articulate what it is the Zestimate. That's the one that almost everybody is familiar with. The Zestimate is literally just an AVM that's been branded and added a little bit of extra information into it. There's also an AVM that's available for you guys through CoreLogic's Realist system. So you guys might notice that whenever you're pulling up tax record information in Realist, there's an AVM where it produces a number, gives a confidence score, it gives you guys a range to work with, and so on. In our case, what we're seeing here is an RVM. Now, an RVM is actually a branded version of an AVM, except in this case, it's called the Realtor Valuation Model. Now, this is, just as Realtor might imply, a tool that's actually been developed by the National Association of Realtors. They have produced their own algorithm that's going to try and get you guys a far more accurate number than you guys can find on any other system. Part of the reason this is because instead of just using the public record information that an AVM would usually gather, this is going to be including information coming over from the MLS, as well as some other details. So this is going to be a far more accurate representation of what the value of the property should be than any of the other automated systems can produce. Now you'll notice this number that it came up with is pretty specific. I mean, all the way down to the tens here. We see that it's got an RVM confidence score of 4 or 5 stars. That 5-star rating means that this has gathered as much information as possible with a lot of confidence in the information that it's gathered. As that number decreases, you'll notice that this number might be pretty far off from where the listing price is. And you'll also notice that this RVM range is also going to increase as well. So notice there's a pretty narrow gap here between the bottom and the top of this range, which again still includes this list price that we have. So there is still going to be some expertise that comes into this. So even though an AVM or RVM is giving you guys a number, you're still the expert. This is just trying to give you guys some guidelines to work with. We're going to be talking a little bit more about the AVM and RVM from the seller's side. So we're going to just skip over that for now. We can see the description of the property. We see some of the property facts. We're going to linger on this area a little bit more later when we're talking from the seller's perspective. We also have a section here for schools. It's important to recognize that the information that we're seeing on here is actually representing the listing side of things, as well as based on location. Now, you may end up noticing that there are some differences between these two from time to time. Just remember that the based on location side of things is going to be gathering information from the proximity and not necessarily what the actual schools are going to be for that property. But we're going to take a look at that again from the seller side of things as well. Buyers might also be interested in this AARP livability index. This is trying to show you guys what the actual living situation would be if you guys moved here, what the housing is like, what the neighborhood is like, transportation, the environment, so on and so forth. Sometimes this is really nice to include. Other times when you guys are producing your report, you may end up not wanting to include it. Like in my case, I might actually not want to include this because it's not giving me a particularly positive outlook on this area. We've got our interior features, again, exterior features, interior features. Both of these are going to be coming over mostly from the listing details. But if the tax record information is showing some of these pieces, it'll also be included from there. Down towards the bottom of the page, it starts getting into the weeds of some of the details that you're probably not going to necessarily need to show to anybody, but it's available if you have somebody interested. So for instance, an investor might need to know some of the details about this, maybe some of the mortgage records, some of the legal descriptions, like what lot, parcel, et cetera, et cetera. All right. We've got another section up here at the top for history. I'm going to blow through the history and charts really quickly so we can go to our break. A little bit overdue for that. The history is fairly simple. It's just going to be showing us the AVM or RVM. You guys can notice as the market starts getting really hot and heavy during the pandemic here, where values just started to explode, it was a kind of gentle increase until about mid 2020, and then suddenly it started to spike a little bit further. We can also narrow this down. So for instance, if we just wanted to see the last 3 years of information, we can still see that nice gentle slope where it gathered a lot of extra value. We can see any of the previous sales, either from the public record information or even going back to the listing records, which does have an overlap here. It looks like in 2008, we see that it was listed with us and some of the details about that. Further down, we've got our tax information. This allows us to move back year by year so we can see the assessment details, as well as any of the mortgage records. We can switch between those just using those little arrows down at the bottom of those sections. Same thing goes for our charts section. Charts are going to be broken down into more of a market snapshot. So we can see this broken down by house, zip code, county, and state. Occasionally, you may end up seeing things instead. So like, for instance, if I searched in Eufaula or Tahlequah, instead of showing us a specific zip code, because again, this is showing us a specific zip code in a major metropolitan area. So it's just trying to show us a little bit more accurate, more relevant details. But if you guys are working in an area that has a lot less population, a lot less housing density, it'll break it down into the city instead. So you may notice a difference in that. But as we scroll through here, we can see the differences between things. We've got the charts. Some of this stuff, again, part of the reason why we're kind of skipping over this, is not going to be relevant for every buyer that you have. But if you do end up having that investor that you guys are working with, some of these details might actually be really pertinent to what they're doing and how they want to view that information. So you guys can check that out and include that on any of the reports that you're creating, which we'll be covering when we get back from our break. So I'm going to jump back to my summary here. And let's go ahead and put our video back on the screen. All right, so before we head to our break, if I could get everybody to hit that raise hand button down at the bottom of your screen. Again, this is just to make sure that everybody's present. This is going to be included in our information in regards to whether or not we can provide CE credit. So just want to make sure everybody's here. We'll be doing the same thing when we get back from our break, but go ahead and hit that raise hand button, and then we'll head to our break. Looks like I got Claire and Heather still need to hit that button if you guys are here. If you just to clarify, if you're having trouble hitting that, or if you guys can't find the button, there is also the chat Q&A option that you guys can hit as well. But, all right, it's 10:05. I will see you guys back here at 10:15. Heather, Claire, I see you guys' hand raised. Thank you. let's get back to it. Okay. So just like last time, if I could get everybody to hit that raise hand button, just want to make sure everybody's present. I appreciate you guys doing this. And all of this is just to make sure that we don't have to go back to having to watch everybody pay attention to the class. I would really prefer that. But again, thank you guys for accommodating us on this. We hope to keep on making sure that the training is approachable as possible without having to go through a bunch of extra hurdles. All right, so let's get started again. So we were, and actually Claire, I think there was a little bit of delay last time, but Claire, if you wouldn't mind hitting that raise hand button. Oh, perfect. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right, so let's jump back into it. So where we left off, we had been searching for a property. As you guys can see, I'm looking at a property right now. I'm going to go back to my search results. If we do end up wanting to look at other properties, again, in this case, we were looking at this from the perspective of our buyer. We can go back to our property results, click on a different property. If we find something that we like, we can hit that save icon. If we do end up saving a property, I wanted to point something out. When we go into the view full details, there's going to be an option here to actually save a specific name to the property. This allows us to kind of keep track of exactly how we're actually going to be viewing this in the future. So instead of it just being some flat address that may or may not have been something that we remembered or not, we can hit change address and change it over to a specific listing. So for instance, if we had an MLS ID that we wanted to jump to, instead of having to go back to our home page, we can change it from there. But if we wanted to save this with a specific name, you can click on that saved button and we can change the name of the property that we're working with. So in this case, I can see just the address itself. I'm going to change this over to Smith's Dream Home. Perfect. Save changes. If I decided that this wasn't of interest anymore, or maybe they ended up buying the property and I no longer need to keep it saved, I can always hit delete from here. All right. Now let's head back to our home page. Now we're going to be discussing things from the perspective of working with a seller. Now, when we're discussing things with a seller, we're going to be looking for properties that are not currently for sale. So we're going to be switching out of this for sale option. We're going to be searching for just public records. So notice when I don't have a for sale or for lease option chosen, it just immediately switches us over to this public records option. We don't even have to worry about any of these alternative options. If we're going to be working with a seller, I'm just going to go ahead and type in their address, 1373 Riverside. Yep, and without even finishing the rest of the address itself, I can see under the address drop down here, or the suggestion drop down, I've got an address that specifically brings me to 1373 Riverside Drive, Tulsa. And when I land on this page, you can see I've already actually gotten this saved. So we've got Sean and Chris, which is the sellers in this case. Sean is actually a lady. And we've got this saved. If I wanted to change this again to their last name or sellers or whatever, or to delete it, you can change that over here. When I scroll down here, we've got an RVM. So this is the one that the system produced. Notice it has a specific range here. The confidence score is 4 stars, which is still a decent score, but you notice that when we were looking at that one that had a 5-star score, the range was, at least percentage-wise, pretty narrow. With this one, I mean, it's well over $100,000 for a property that's at most worth $452,000. Now, in my case, I've actually produced a couple extra items on here. We've got a refined value here, which is one that I've actually modified with this refined value choice, or we've even produced a CMA, which actually appears to be a little bit lower than what our RVM originally created. Now, I'm going to go through to our refined value. We're going to reset that, and then to our CMA option. Go. And it's clear all and start over. So we're all back to basics. When I go back to my summary page, this is what it's going to look like when you guys first land on a listing. So we see our RVM that it's produced over here. We've got $393,380. Again, pretty specific. We've got our refined value button, which allows us to refine the value by jumping into this tab. And then we've got a create CMA button, which is going to jump us over into our CMA tab. Now, if we're lucky enough to have an RVM on a property, cool, this will be helpful. It's worth noting, though, that whenever we end up having, oh, Claire, I saw your hand was up. I wasn't sure whether or not that was related to our attendance thing. Did you have a question that you'd like to ask? I'll assume so. Here, give you the, hey, good morning. Oh, did you have a question? No? Oh, okay, no worries. All right. So when we're looking at the refined value option, what this is actually going to be doing, as it says here, is that it's actually going to be working with this RVM as a base number. So it's going to be taking the just automatic production of this value and trying to change little things about it. So when we click on refine value, it'll land us on a page that's actually going to be assigning specific numbers based on the market of this particular area. So for instance, if I ended up increasing or decreasing how many bedrooms or bathrooms or this lot size, the living area, or even changing the year built if it didn't have that in there, all of that's going to be assigned a very specific valuation, which increases or decreases the value of the property. Now, in our case, this is in Tulsa County, which for whatever dumb reason doesn't include the bedroom count. So I'm going to have to manually put in the bedroom count. I know that this property actually has, let's say, 2 full bath and 2 partial bath. So once I've actually modified those numbers, oh, actually, they've got a mother-in-law suite that's technically attached to the house now because there's a little walkway connected between the two. But I'm going to put the living square foot as a total amount, which is 2,300. All right. So I've made some changes, some subtle, some pretty large. When I click apply, notice this is dramatically increasing the value of the property. So we went from almost nearly doubled it just by changing a couple pieces of information. Now, if I were to modify any piece of information back to maybe a previous number or a smaller number, you notice that it changes the value that it's assigning to that. So if I go back to just the flat numbers, maybe even just change the full bath, apply, it's going to represent that extra bathroom by giving it a new number. Some of the pieces of information that are actually missing might not actually adjust the value. So notice when I put in the bedroom count, it wasn't including that as a percentage or as a value anyway. So it doesn't actually change things. This is another reason why, if you guys are in any way connected to any of the counties or the tax record or the assessor's offices, if you can ask them politely, or maybe not so politely, to include as much information as possible, it's going to help you guys with AVMs, the RVMs, just getting the values of the properties, makes your CMAs more accurate. Anyway, a little bit further down, we can also refine the value based on any of the home improvements that they've done. So in this case, if we have a major kitchen remodel that they did, we can represent that by putting in a major kitchen remodel. In my case, I just put mid-range. It wasn't a lot of extra items, and it certainly wasn't upscale necessarily. So I'm going to put mid-range. They completed this as their pandemic project, and it was $20,000 worth of improvements. Now, whenever we do the home improvements, it is going to give it a little bit of a depreciation of the value. So notice even just doing something in April last year, so not even a full year ago, that $20,000 that they invested in it is not going to automatically increase the value of $20,000. Of course, we know that as real estate experts. They don't necessarily always know that, but this will at least give them a very flat number saying, look, I know that that's something that you guys did and something that was value, but it doesn't just give a flat increase to the value of the property by doing so. Now, as far as the refined value by needed improvements, This one is actually going to be a very direct number for people. If you do end up having those clients that are kind of, I almost made a very bad pun. You know what, whatever. If they're on the fence about making improvements to the property, for instance, the fence needs to be repaired, well, fence repairs can be added in here. And we can give them, all right, well, I got a guy that says that, you got at least $1,500 worth of repairs needed for the fence. Click add, and it's going to just deduct that from whatever the value is. Now, part of the reason why is because any of the upgrades that you guys add to a home, there's going to be some inherent depreciation of the value because the labor that went into it, the cost of the products that were added to the house, all of that stuff, as soon as it starts getting used or as soon as it's being done, the value decreases. But whenever it comes to the needed improvements, these are things that might sometimes be necessary for the client that's buying the property to do, and subsequently we don't want to include those values in the property's value as a whole. Prime example that I found a few years ago when my wife and I were looking for a new place to live, we found this really wonderful property in North Tulsa. It had a really great view of the city. It was on top of a hill. It was wonderful. There was brand new bathrooms. They just did a huge kitchen remodel, so on and so forth. $120,000 for a 2-story that had like 2,200 square feet. $120,000. This was still, I mean, a pretty nice place. Well, lo and behold, there was about $100,000 worth of foundation repairs that were needed. Not needed, required. So in situations like that, you can do foundation repairs and give them that flat deduction of value. Add. So you guys can help represent some of those hidden costs to the buyer. But again, all of this is going to be if needed. You don't necessarily have to add these in here. Further down, this is when we're starting to really get into more of the subjective side of things. We do have the refined value by market and home conditions. It's important to recognize that this is going to be something that you might want to do based on a specific number that you're aiming for. Now, in my case, if I wanted to add a little bit extra value to the property, I can go through and change this based on my market conditions. So if I wanted to add $10,000 to the value of this property, I can say that my market conditions in this area are looking pretty hot. So I'm going to maybe slide this over to just about there. So I've got an extra $8,500. If I wanted to add a little bit extra value because maybe the view is really nice, like for instance, this particular property actually overlooks the river, I can just increase it just a little bit. Oh, that's 15,000. I can kind of move these around until it finally gets the number that I want. And then the only thing that I have to worry about is trying to explain to my client, oh, I increase this just a little bit, increase this just a little bit because, this particular area is hopping right now. All the properties that are along the river are hopping right now. That's part of the reason why I increased the view as well. But it's worth noting, all of this is going to be relatively subjective. So trying to hit a specific number is probably a wise goal rather than just going in here and being like, oh yeah, the market's really hot. Boom, slide that to the max. Wait a second, I added $21,000. This is just such a specific number for me to have. Maybe I wanted to decrease the privacy because it's here in Oklahoma and you've got a Dollar Tree across the street, which also might decrease the value of the view as well. So you can always mess with this to try and hit a specific number. I would suggest having a goal in mind just to ensure that you're not just playing with these for fun. Now, if I scroll back up to the top, I can see as we've been making adjustments, it's been making those adjustments over here to the right. Kind of wish this section slid with us as we go down, but when you do end up making those adjustments, you can always hit this reset value option to try and bring you back in line with everything that you have in the system, or bring back all of the changes that you've made in the system to the automated value that was created. Now, let's say that this is just a little bit too much reliant on the system itself. I mean, maybe this number is just radically off. You guys know due to whatever experiences you've had as an appraiser, as a real estate professional, whatever the case may be, the training that you guys were provided through your company, that this number is just off. You know that this property is worth maybe less or more. Well, we can always go with the more traditional route, which is the CMA option. And again, just as a reminder, we have two different ways to get to that spot. If we click on Create CMA, or if we click on this CMA tab, it's going to lead us to the same place. Brings us over to our CMA option. And now we can see we've got either a comparative analysis choice or a sales comparison analysis. Now, both of these options are great. It's worth pointing out that one of the big issues between these two is that the comparative analysis is going to be more approachable to everyone. All agents, all realtors, all brokers can gain access to this, and it's going to make a lot of sense. You don't have to put in a lot of analysis or expertise into it to be able to come up with the information you want. The sales comparison analysis is going to be a lot more specific. There's going to be a lot more nuance to it. So if you do have that extended experience or training, that might be a really good way to try and get some of that information in there so that your client knows exactly your value as a realtor, as well as also seeing their value of their property. And Sherry asked, how is that last refinement value determined? I remember the improvement values are pulled from an annual report, but where does the relative or slider values come from? That is a question that I've actually posed to our training people. It's just a matter of the system coming up with those numbers. It's a part of the algorithm that they're using to produce the RVMs. So it's trying to take into account literally the market value changes. So like if there's a zip code that's nearby that has a lot more activity in it, and subsequently the values of those properties are a little bit higher, it's going to assign a specific number to each of those notches on the refined value chart. Same thing goes with the interior and exterior values. So like if a property was recently sold, there's some expectation that there might have been some changes to the property's appearance, those kinds of things. Fortunately, as far as the actual specific numbers and how these algorithms are producing those specific numbers, I actually don't know. I can find out though. I probably should find out a little bit more about each of these. I mean, that's part of the reason why I recommend coming up with a very specific number, because then when you try to explain these to your clients, it might be a little bit difficult. I'm going to save that question though, because I'm going to see if I can get a more direct answer from our liaison. But thank you. All right, so jumping back to our CMA option. So again, comparative analysis is going to be the one that I recommend to people. The sales comparison analysis, this is going to be, again, far more detailed, more nuanced. Use your expertise to try and produce a very specific number. So just like we saw when we were on the refined value option, there is, under the sales comparison analysis, a way to try and give a specific number to each of the different attributes. So for instance, if we had 4 bedrooms and some of the comparative properties nearby actually have 5 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms, you can add or subtract some of the value of that property in order to make sure that your number falls in line with what the true market representation should be. So what an appraiser would normally be doing. If you guys want to learn more about the difference between the two, there is actually a quick, well, quote unquote, quick video here. It's a couple minutes long. It just goes into the differences between the two if you guys want to learn more about them. Now, the first step that we have on our CMA process is confirming the home facts. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that we know exactly what each of the numbers are for this property. So in our case, I need to make sure that the 4 bedrooms is represented, the 2 bathrooms. Total bath is 3, full bathroom is 2, partial bath is 1. There we go. So we've got all of those marked in there. Living area, I'm going to leave that with the number that it originally came with. Pool, I put in no, and confirm home facts and close. So all the details that we've provided in here, 4321, confirm facts, and it's going to produce a find comps button now. This is where we're going to be going through and searching for each of the properties in the area. It's going to provide us with a little automatic search. We can add a known property if we've already gone through and matrix, for instance, and found a bunch of properties that are comparable. But in our case, we're going to be using the RPR system to do our search. Over here on the left-hand side, it's going to automatically choose whatever the property type was that the property in question, so our subject property is. So we've got single family. On our property status, we've got active, pending, and closed are automatically chosen for us. NAR, as well as the MLS, both are kind of in agreement on this. Active, pending, and closed are going to be the crucial items that you need to have. And in fact, if you guys have been through our CMAs and matrix class, this is the same recommendation we make there. We need to have active because we need to know what's currently on the market and what their values are. We need to have pending so that we have a perspective of what properties are actually selling for the amounts that were originally listed. And then of course, closed is even further. This is the actual values that those properties closed for. Because as you guys are probably aware, sometimes it's listed for one price, it goes pending for that price, and then subsequently closes for a different price. So offers are coming in for the pending, they're actually closing at a certain value. We need all of that information included. There's also another recommendation that they make. This is going to be especially crucial as time goes on. You will end up noticing that some of the properties will end up expiring. During 2020 and 2021, we noticed a dramatic, just a huge decrease in how many properties were actually making it to their expiration. But almost always it was either going to be because it was a property that was rural or it was a property that was overvalued. And that's part of the reason why we might recommend that you end up including the expired listings, is if you do end up having that client that has a property that they've, saw this Zillow's estimate, wow, they think it's going to be worth $100,000 more than what you were recommending. So what do you know? Well, if you include those expired listings, you might be able to illustrate to them, look, we've got a property here that was listed at, $1 million and subsequently ended up expiring. That property is now closed and it ended up selling for $750,000. So trying to get your property listed for 1.5 million isn't realistic. So you can use those expired listings to try and maybe reel people back into reality. But this is kind of a AEIOU, sometimes Y situation. You don't always necessarily need to include the expireds, but it might be beneficial to just leave that on. Also, just like we discussed in our CMAs and matrix class, in addition to the property's status, we also need to give it a little bit of relevance based on the time frame that we're looking at. So in our case, we always want to make sure that we're looking within the last 6 months. What this means is that I'm not going to be seeing any properties that are pending or closed or expired outside of that 6-month time range. This was especially crucial during the market fluctuations that we saw in 20 and 21. As time goes on and the market kind of rebalances itself into a quote unquote new normal, this may need to close back into a specific time frame or maybe open back up depending on where you guys live. Now, if you are working in an area that's a little bit more rural or even just outside of a city, you may end up needing to change this a little bit to try and find more results. You can always change this based on the market activity in the area. So for instance, if this area right here was just absolutely hopping, just tons of properties moving, we might want to actually decrease this down to the last 3 months. 6 months is a little bit more realistic time frame. This is actually the one that we recommend as a default, no matter where you are. But if you guys are working with properties that are a little bit more rural, going out to 12 months would be appropriate. It gives us an option to go a full 1.5 years back. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this, again, just because the market might be slow where you are, but finding a property that's a 1.5 years ago could mean that you're finding property information that's just not relevant. So keep those expectations in line with whatever area you're working within. So for instance, in my case, I'm going to leave mine on the last 6 months. We've got a size area, which is going to be beds, baths, living size. And then we also have the option to do a price range. Notice this is not checked. So it set a bunch of minimums, did not set a maximum for most of these. It set a living square footage. This is going to be a range that's been defined by whatever the property's range was. You guys remember this is 500 below and 500 above. So it's giving us a relatively narrow range If you guys wanted to get into the percentages, you would have to actually do those calculations on your own. Unlike, I think it's Realist does a percentage option. But finally, we get to our price range. This is one that I just straight up don't recommend using. The only reason I say that is because a price range is going to lock you into finding only properties that are similarly priced. If we're trying to find properties that are truly comparable, their price is actually going to be what we're looking for, not trying to restrict base on it. Now, another reason why this is important to at least have the option for it is if we are working with a property that happens to have waterfront. This was actually something that was introduced to me when I was working with people down in Durant, where there was a lot of lakefront properties. In fact, there was actually an office there with a bit of a firebrand broker that was extremely knowledgeable about a lot of this stuff. And that was one of the things that she mentioned, was that whenever you're looking for comparable properties, if you don't have an option to narrow down by the fact that it has a waterfront or lakefront or whatever, it could mean that you're going to end up finding a bunch of properties that are nearly identical to the property that you're working with, but because they don't have that waterfront, the values are dramatically lower. I mean, half the value sometimes. So having that price range option is available if you guys are working with a property that's relatively unique. It's not necessarily something I would recommend using outside of those very specific situations. Finally, we have a year built option. This one's set to the maximum. We also have the option to put in min and max, just to make sure that if we are working in an area where there's a subdivision that's 50 years old right next to a subdivision that's 20 years old, we aren't finding properties in that nearby subdivision. Now, speaking of proximity, just like we discussed in our CMAs and matrix class, we always need to define an area. So we need to make sure that the status is relevant. We need to make sure the time frame is relevant. The comparable criteria is all relevant. But most importantly, we also don't want to find a bunch of comparable properties that are really far outside of the area that of interest. Because again, the market could be radically different, even just across the river here. So just as a little note, we need to make sure that whenever we're searching within RPR, the map area that you're looking at is going to be the area that it searches within. We have a couple options to define that area further. We've got a draw shape where we can put in a box. We wanted to say, I only want to see things over here. We also have the option to define it by a radius. So if I just wanted to see the things that are within half a mile, for instance, we can set that. We also have the option to set up a polygon. So just like I mentioned here, if I want to only search for the items on the east side of the river, I can define that here. There we go. And whenever we're ready, we can search in this area, which will hit the search button that's also available down here. We can also edit this area further if we needed to maybe draw something in just a little bit, or maybe even add a corner by clicking on those center lines there. Now, if I do end up wanting to save this search area, so for instance, maybe I happen to have my office here on Denver, and this is kind of my specialty is working in the area, I can save this area so that next time I'm in this area, I can just say lower downtown. Shout out to Denver with Lodo. Anyway. So I can save that area so that the next time I'm actually running a search, I can just choose that custom area that I've created. All right. But in my case, I'm going to actually remove this. How do we remove this again? Anyway, reset all those options. All right, so we're going to run our search. What this is going to do is it's going to end up providing me my search results down here at the bottom. And you'll notice that whenever it ends up running that search, I have the option to choose to include these in our comp list. Now, there's also going to be an extra option. I'm going to go back to modify search, and let's do expired. See if there's any expireds that pop up. No, it didn't end up adding anything. Okay. If we do end up getting lucky and finding some comps that are actually other properties that were included specifically in our RVM, it'll have a little star over here that'll indicate this is a property that we actually think is similar both from the system's perspective and also from the search that we just ran. So on here, I can do add to comp list. You notice that that range is going to start showing a difference between what the top value is and the low value is. So as I start adding these on there, it's going to give me a broader or narrower range. Now, in my case, I see that I've got a couple properties, specifically, looks like this one right here, which is in the Riverside area or Riverview area. This one's got a significantly higher property value. I can see that these two over here are also going to include some values. Oh, it did actually reset it. That's right. Anyway, this is not the area we're searching within. It's just running the search based on the where the map is located. I did it right without even realizing it. Anyway, down here at the bottom, I can see that those properties that were across the river are still being included. So if we do end up finding that this isn't providing us with the best results, we can choose whether or not we want to include this. In my case, we'll just run with this to see what it produces. So down here at the bottom, I'll do update valuation and close. Here we go. And I can see my comps up here at the top. I've got an average. And then down here, my result of comp analysis is actually producing a significantly lower number than what I might be interested in presenting to my client. But it also gives me a range down here. So what I can do is I can actually manually edit this comp analysis so that I can say, all right, my recommended price, I'm going to say 300,000, and we're going to put in a minimum of 280,000, and a maximum of 380,000. So obviously this is just to put details in here. Please don't take this as a legitimate understanding of what the value is of this property. Now, once I've gone through and created this number, there's a nice big button down here at the bottom to create report. That's actually what we're going to spend the latter portion of our class on. Now, whenever we end up getting into this create report option, if we're doing it from the CMA perspective, it's just going to be bringing us to this seller's report. Now, the seller's report is what's going to be giving a client pretty good understanding of what their value is, and also more details about their property, even going so far as to show us details about the market area that they're in. Now, if we wanted to learn more about this particular report, there is a view sample option, which will give them a little bit of a, give us, I guess I should say, a little bit of an understanding of what's going to be included. It's going to be roughly 81 pages, depending on how many extra pieces of information we're going to be including. The exact number isn't known. There's also an option to choose which parts and pieces of the report to include, which will increase or decrease how many pages are going to be included. As it goes through this slideshow, we can also pause this and quickly jump through these. We can see property history, sales and financing, market activity, some of the charts that may or may not be of interest to our seller, but might help them clarify what the value is. So as we go through this, the client might have questions. So it's always a good idea to go through and actually create a report just for any property. I typically recommend to people to just create a seller's report for your own house, just to see what it looks like, just to see what the information looks like, whether or not it's information that you guys want to explain to client, or maybe even just isn't of value to the clients that you're typically working with. We've got a plus icon over here to the right that allows us to choose which parts and pieces we want to include. So each report, as you guys can see, has its own view sample button and its own little plus button. So if I wanted to include, let's say, the market activity for the area that we're working with, I can check or uncheck those checkboxes. Just so you guys are aware, since I wasn't actually aware of this whenever we first started doing the RPR reports, these market activity sections could dramatically increase how many pages your report is. And depending on the client that you're working with, they may not want to see this. So showing them any of the properties that are for sale currently in their area might be of some interest if they, want to have a better perspective of the value of their property. or it might just remind them that there are 1 in 100 properties nearby, and that might not be very good to know. So you can uncheck or check those. And then it also has down here recommended pricing strategy. Notice I have unchecked the refined value calculation because maybe the system produced a number that I don't agree with as the real estate expert. So I unchecked that one, or we can leave that on there just to give some extra perspective of here's what the system is recommending, here's what I'm recommending. This could be especially beneficial if you guys have a lower value that the system has produced. So like earlier, we were taking a look at an active listing that was $200,000, but the RVM was actually for $188,000. So I might want to include that just to say, look, the system is saying that it should be this much. We both know that it's worth more. This is what I'm recommending. A little bit further down, we also can choose how many pages of property photos we want to include, whether we want to do all, the main photo. We can also limit the market activity sections. So for instance, if I did choose to include these, but I also didn't want to just include everything that was nearby, we can just do 4 properties instead. There's also some details that I can include in my notes. Seller's proceed entries could be added. We've got a estimated value for the property. If I don't want to include that, I can suppress it. We can also include or not include the estimated value for the comps as well. So it does find some comparable properties. They may end up having some estimated values that they can also see. We might want to not include that. Now, once we're all set with all of the details about the report, we can collapse this by hitting the little negative sign or leave it open. Either way, we're going to scroll down where we can personalize your report. From here, we can enter the name of the recipient that we're going to be sending this off to. So in my case, my seller. We can also add in some extra details like, hey, this is the report that I was mentioning. It's got your pricing recommendation included in there. When they open up the PDF that you're sending to them, they can see all of those details. Instead of emailing that to myself, or in this case to our recipient, I'm going to hit this Display Now option. This is going to run the report. It's going to put this under the Reports button up here at the top. And if you guys remember, our homepage also includes a place to see all of the reports that I've recently created. But I'm going to let that run, and we're going to see how long it takes to produce this seller's report. So click Run Report. It lets me know that it's actually trying to create this report. It looks like mine is 54th in line. It's like a lot of people are using RPR right now, but as soon as it's done, I should be able to see that report. So while we're taking a look at that, or while we're waiting for that, excuse me, let's take a look at the property report instead. Now, the property report is going to be a little bit more basic. This is the one that I recommend to people whenever they're trying to find a property that's currently for sale. Or if you guys are in the very initial stages of discussing everything with a seller, you guys can produce a property report, make sure that all of the information that's on it is correct. Now, the view sample button in this case is going to show us a little bit simpler report. Notice this is giving us an estimate of about 28 pages. A lot of the same information will be displayed here, but it's important to note that this is going to be more focused on just giving the absolute like just raw data, no estimation of value, no details about what the criteria are for what it's being searched for whenever you guys ended up finding the property. It's just trying to give you flat facts about the property in question. A little bit further down on here, we can see our basic information about the property is included. I mentioned earlier that maybe if I'm working in an area where the AARP livability index is relatively low, which unfortunately is most of Oklahoma, you can uncheck that checkbox to not include it. Let's say that there's some assessed values for the property that maybe aren't in line with what we think the value is. We can uncheck that. This is all coming over from the county assessor's offices though, so keep that in mind. And then a little bit further down, we've got our neighborhood statistics. I'm going to talk about the neighborhood side of things in a moment here. If you don't have any kids in the property, or maybe they're in that AARP range, maybe they don't need to know what the schools are nearby, so you can choose whether to include the schools at all. Or if you guys do have kids that are going to be going to some of the schools in the vicinity, you can choose whether or not to include the school reviews. Fair warning, those school reviews that we're seeing on here are coming from a company called Niche. They do a lot of information gathering, but they also get to include some of the reviews for the schools, which, just so you guys are aware, are coming from either current or previous students. And some of them can be candid. We'll just put it that way, blunt maybe. So whether or not you guys want to include those school reviews is up to you. You guys can choose to include that or not. I'm going to choose to show all of the photos, and we'll run that property report. So I'm going to run this concurrent with the other one that I'm creating. Ooh, looks like there's a little bit less activity now, right? So that's our property report. It's also worth pointing out, we kind of skipped over the neighborhood option earlier, but we do have some reports that are available for each of the different neighborhoods that we're working with. Now, since Oklahoma doesn't have too many I think there's eight codified neighborhoods. Typically, whenever we're running a market activity or a neighborhood report, it's going to be doing that same generalization that we discussed earlier. When we were looking at the property details under the charts, it gave us the option to see this particular house and then the zip code, county, and state. Other times it may end up saying, all right, this house, and then it's going to be showing the city, then the county, and then the state. Those kinds of decisions are being made in the background. So whenever we're actually going through and taking a look at the neighborhood, for instance, in Eufaula and Tahlequah, the examples I used earlier, it may end up trying to just gather the information for that city. Whereas in this case, since I've created, looks like one of my reports is done. In this case, it's actually going to narrow us down to a specific zip code, just because there's a lot of information, or maybe that's the only place that has a lot of housing density. So it's just decided to dump everything into that zip code. Whereas if it's a more generalized area like Tahlequah and Eufaula, it's going to simplify it down to the city. All right. So we just had our first report created. I didn't hear the ding, which is supposed to play. Do have the report bell turned on. It's not muted, is it? Oh, it's supposed to produce a little doorbell sound. Anyway, I'm going to go to my seller's report. So we've got our seller's report. Looks like right up here at the top. I'm going to just click download report. This was a button that I clicked away from whenever it popped up, but on the download report option, it shows us the PDF that would have been emailed to my client. So here's our current estimated value. I chose to include this. I had the option to suppress it. It does also indicate to them the range that it produced, as well as its confidence score. Here's also my comp analysis. It shows the range that I produced for that, as well as, again, the price per square foot. A little further down, it shows what facts had actually been modified, highlighting those for my client so that they know that I've been keeping track of that. Here's our AARP livability index, our historical photos, property history, so on and so forth. A little bit further down on our report, we're going to see our comps. So if we go to my average of comps, I can see what the averages were, the estimates and adjustments. Again, I can choose to not include this in case it does happen to be something that's radically far off from where it is now. But this report, again, you guys can customize. And all of this was done without me doing pretty much anything extra. So rather than having to go through this big rigmarole of trying to get some graphic designer at my office to gather all this information and dump it into a PDF for me, I can just hit a couple buttons and it produces that report. And in a couple minutes here, I'm also going to have a property report. The important thing to remember about everything that we've been discussing today is that even though the interface may be a little bit different, you guys can do all of the stuff that we just did on our phones, including creating reports. Now, I mentioned this at the beginning of class, but if you guys are out on the road, you guys can actually find a property that's maybe immediately across the street from some place that you guys are currently showing. And instead of having to say, oh, I'll get the information to you when I get back to the office, you guys can search for that property just by clicking on a couple buttons on your phone and then produce a report that gets emailed to them. So while you guys are out on a showing tour, they point at a property, you find the report, send it off to them, and it's waiting in their inbox. Now, in case any of this has kind of gone overhead, or if you guys forgotten anything, there's two buttons up here at the top that I wanted to cover, then we'll be officially done with class. There is a Learn option. This option is actually going to be a contextual learning tab. What that means is that no matter what page you guys find yourself on, so like we're on the home page, it's got a little minute 41-second option. Oh, there's the doorbell sound. Got this learning option where it's got My Markets. You can do an Explore the Homepage option. If we switch over to a specific property that we were just looking at, so like in this case, I switch over to this property. When I click on this Learn tab, it's going to have contextual information. So what the property details looks like, how to price a property out. There's also, again, that Help button. And just as a reminder, this training area has a wealth of information. In fact, this is where I spend the majority of my time when I was trying to get certified to teach this class. So we had a bunch of different webinars and tutorials, guides, and ebook that's available to you guys. There's just a ton of different ways for you guys to interact with this system. And there's a whole wealth of information that you guys have access to learn more about it. But as always, if you guys have any questions for the MLS, you can always get in contact with us Monday through Friday, 8 to 5:30. But class is officially over. Just wanted to say thank you guys so much for joining us. If you wouldn't mind, hit that raise hand button one more time, and we will go ahead and depart. Excellent. I appreciate it. Oh, Mandy, I think if you wouldn't mind hitting that raise hand button. I know that there's a, oh, perfect. Thank you guys so much. Yeah, just so everybody's aware, if you guys were joining us from the beginning of class, all of you guys are eligible for CE credit. So I'll get that report sent off. Thank you guys again so much for joining us today. If you do end up having any problems or questions with RPR specifically, don't forget about that phone number. If you guys have any questions with the MLS or data that's coming over from the MLS into RPR, they're not perfect. Every once in a while, very, very rarely, I think I've got maybe 5 phone calls in the last 4 years. Very rarely we'll have some issues, but we'll see them occasionally. Just give us a call, let us know. But thank you guys so much. Again, class is officially over. If you guys want to dip, stay safe, keep wearing your masks, social distancing, et cetera, and hopefully we'll be able to get back into in-person classes soon. Have a good one, guys. Yeah, be safe for sure. And thank you for joining us, Janet. I'll get the recording of the full webinar sent out to you as well. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close up shop. Have a good one, folks.